Yeah, that's true.
No, clearly she values the two words yeet and yeet more than the debate.
I think that's a perfectly fine position to take.
I agree. Take that position.
I think we should change the motion.
Okay.
Hello from the absolutely beautiful city of St. Andrews. We are extremely excited to be here debating the St. Andrews Debate Society. They are one of the most decorated and oldest debate societies here in the UK, and it's always one of our favorite debates.
Yeah.
Just lovely people, and it's so fun to debate a society that has been around for so long. So tonight we are debating the resolution on balance. This House regrets the election of Donald Trump. So it should be a very lively and spirited debate. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to chat about in our commentary.
Yeah, interestingly enough, they have a couple of Americans, I think, that are going to, they're over here as students. And so it should be really interesting to see the different perspectives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as you've probably figured out by now, I'm Dr. Nikki Freeman. This is Dr. Jack Rogers, and we will be talking you through the debate tonight. And it looks like we are going to get started in just a few moments, but I just want to show you this really quickly to give you an idea of the positions that we are in tonight. So you can see that the UCM teams are in opening government and then also closing opposition. So as we've pointed out before in some of our earlier broadcasts, we always take the corners. So we're not debating ourselves. So then St. Andrews will be in opening opposition and closing government. So both schools have an opportunity to represent both sides of the resolution. It looks to me like they are probably getting pretty close to getting ready to start the debate. We'll be popping in and out throughout the debate as normal. But let's go ahead and see if we are ready to turn it over to the chamber and start tonight's debate.
And she goes insane.
Please don't murder me. I'll be nice, I swear.
No, I just don't. I don't really like POIs. I don't think they should be part of debating. This is the one opinion
You
I
need
have.
to get a fucking different hobby, Ruth.
I hate
Take
debating.
up fucking slam poetry.
I mean, in many ways, debating is slam poetry.
Just slam your opponent's ideas into the ground.
You live on
All
the
right,
air?
it looks like they are not quite ready for us to get started yet, so we're going to just chat with you a little bit more about what you'll see tonight in case this is the first time you've tuned in with us. Like we have said in our earlier broadcast, you will see that there are 4 teams of 2 in tonight's debate. And basically, it looks like a ping pong match where the Prime Minister will start off the debate in support of the resolution, and then the next person to speak is the leader of the opposition. And then we will just ping pong our way all the way down the table until all 8 speakers have debated and filled their role in tonight's debate. And every position in BP debate has a specific role to fill. And you'll probably see that in tonight's speeches.
Yeah.
So, Jack, could you tell me a little bit about the role and the purpose of the Prime Minister's speech?
The Prime Minister represents, quote unquote, the government, and so they're responsible for defending and supporting the resolution. So they'll be presenting a case that, on balance, this House, which they'll probably define as the U.S., regrets the election of President Trump. So they kind of kick the ball off, and then, of course, the opposition's job is to prove that, no, we don't regret the election of Trump as president. And so we should hear both pros and cons to having President Trump serve as our president, going back and forth. So basically, they just kick off the debate.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
And what's really important to just remind everybody who may be watching at home is the great thing about debate is you have to be well versed on both sides of the
Right.
resolution.
Right.
So just because our students or the students of St. Andrews are representing one side of this resolution tonight, that doesn't necessarily mean that
Right.
that's what they believe.
Right.
That's what we love about debate is they have to be able to be well versed on both sides. They need to be able to articulate points that make sense on both sides, and hopefully we'll see some really, really good clash in tonight's debate. And I think we will.
We should. It's, very often you end up, just like the defense attorney or prosecuting attorney, your job is to give that person their day in court. And so, you may not personally believe that we should regret or that we should applaud, but that's the side of the resolution that they're on. And so, that's what you get to defend. And that's, teaches the kids to understand both sides of an argument and to be able to articulate whatever side they get
Right.
put on. So
Well, it does look like
Looks
now
like, yeah.
they are getting ready for the debate.
Right.
So we are going to turn it back over into the chamber, and let's get tonight kicked off.
Union Debating Society, the oldest and some might say finest of its kind. We're actually here in St. Andrews, which has the Union Debating Society that was founded in 1794, the oldest in the English-speaking world. Today we are here to debate on the motion on balance, this House regrets the election of President Trump. I will now like to invite Marissa, who will be able to chair the debate.
And before we begin, obviously I'm Marissa, but I'd like to recognize the rest of the panel.
I'm Ryan, I go by she, her pronouns.
I'm Marissa, I go by she, her pronouns.
Tony, she, or they, please.
And me, she, or they. All right, and with that being said, I would also like to ask your name and your pronoun. So the Prime Minister.
Abby, she, her.
All right, the Leader of Opposition.
Sasha, he, him.
I'm sorry, would you mind repeating it for me?
Sasha, he, him.
All right, the Deputy Prime Minister.
Manny, he, him.
The Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Anna Ruth, cheer they please.
Would you mind? I'm sorry.
Anna Ruth, cheer they please.
Okay. All right, the Member of Government.
Ruth Shielday, please.
Member of Opposition.
Trenton, he, him.
The Government Whip.
Malcolm, he, him.
And last but not least, the Opposition Whip.
Bobby, she or they.
All right, thank you so much. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started with this debate. So I'd like to recognize the Prime Minister Abby for a speech that does not exceed 7 minutes. Hear, hear.
Just for a sound check, can everyone hear this?
No.
Sorry, do it again? Yeah, I could hear it that time.
I'll do it too, along with
Okay, cool. Perfect. All right, so I would just like to start off this debate by offering a quick round of thank yous. I know that we were very excited to not have to ride a rickety bus here. It was very nice that our hotel was just a few blocks away. And we are just so excited to talk about Donald Trump again, because who doesn't love talking about Donald Trump? So, per the resolution, this House regrets the election of Donald Trump. We have decided to define this House as the United States. The resolution calls out the election, so we find this definition to be correct because this debate needs to be focused on those who elected Donald Trump. I will be going over 2 points of reasoning, and my partner Manny will present a third and will prove to you why you'll be voting for the government side today. Our first point of reasoning is that on increased polarization. Basically, what's happening right now between the Democrats and the Republicans is that there is no one in the middle. You're either Democrat or you're a Republican. There are only two voices that we are allowed to hear. There's no one in the middle. We aren't allowed to hear any moderate voices because Trump's time in office has encouraged each side to become more powerful. Due to this, there are no checks and balances on either sides because both sides are simply trying to outdo each other and or simply speak louder than the other. They have absolutely nothing holding them accountable because they're just, not right now, they're just trying to outdo each other, and they're trying to be the loudest voice because they're the ones who think they're right. They're not allowing anyone in the middle to actually have a rational point of view on things. The current news media is a prime example of this polarization. For example, over in America, we have two main sources of quote-unquote news: Fox News for Republicans and MSNBC for Democrats. If you're a Republican, you watch Fox News. Sorry, I lost my place. If you're a Republican, you watch Fox News and you watch MSNBC for Democrats. If you're a Republican, you watch Fox because Fox presents the good side of Trump, and it kind of makes you feel validated. Like, this is why I voted for him. He might be good economically. He might be good for all these other different reasons. So you watch Fox News because those are yeah, your question.
How is this polarization different than with other presidents?
There has been polarization with many other presidents before. We're not saying that this is a brand new thing with Trump, but what we're saying is, and what we're advocating for, is that Trump has actually made it worse, and I'll kind of explain that as I go down along my points. Moving on, and this is vice versa. It's on the Democrat side as well. If you're Democrats, you watch MSNBC so they can hear about all of the bad things that have come out of the Trump administration. We're not hearing anything from the middle. We're only hearing he's good, he's bad. Furthermore, hearing the mockery of Trump from specifically MSNBC also perpetuates the idea of fake news, and this is bad. I don't know about you guys, but I prefer my news to be real, not fake. So we really need news outlets who are actually focused on providing both sides objectively. This is why each side watches their own news stations so that they can actually feel validated in their decision to either support or oppose Trump. Within the news media, we are only allowed to hear two very different and polarizing points of view. As I've stated multiple times before, there is no one rational speaking in the news media right now. It is only those who either very much support Trump or very much oppose him. We have a couple impacts that we're going to be talking about on the polarization of this issue. Our first impact is that polarization creates more gridlock in Congress. Hearing these polarizing views makes United States constituents vote in very polarizing ways without a voice in the middle. We have no moderate voice. We have no rational point of view, and therefore nothing productive can actually happen. For example, the government shutdown last year, what good actually came out of that? Nothing. And it's because we have two polarizing points of view and no one in the middle who can actually think rationally. Now, how does this actually link to Trump? Republicans came out and actually stated that, for example, Republicans came out and stated that they actually weren't willing to listen to any of the statements made about impeachment. Trump has increased the polarization of these two sides within the United States and within both main parties. The impeachment process is a very serious thing that both sides actually need to listen to. But under the Trump administration, people are either Republican or they're Democrat, and they don't want to hear what the other side has to say. Therefore, like my example with the impeachment, no one who supported Trump actually wanted to hear the reasoning behind the impeachment trials. Gridlock has become worse under President Trump because neither side is actually willing to talk or work with one another. Our second impact is that there are two echo chambers of radical sides yelling with no one in the middle. This makes voters and US constituency as a whole experience more cognitive dissonance. They have to move their anchor points, so their original belief points, to more outside of their view. So they either have to go more right or more left. People are often then unable to listen objectively to the other side. So what does this lead to? We then demonize the other side. There's more hateful rhetoric, and there's constant fighting with no actual legitimate change. There have been so many studies that have shown that people, not right now, that people actually don't know what either side actually believes. Republicans hate the Democrats hate Republicans, but neither can actually tell you what the other side believes, and that's because they're not willing to listen to one another. This is extremely harmful. We have to end this polarization and bring our voices back in the middle. We need to start combining both sides so we can actually have a legitimate point of view. Moving on to our second point, that of diplomatic legitimacy. Trump does not use his soft power appropriately. He not only makes fun of world leaders, but his worldwide initiatives are very questionable and detrimental, not only for human rights, but also for climate change. For example, he pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, he pulled out of the Human Rights Convention, and we were only one of 3 countries to do so. Trump is willing to sacrifice our ability to persuade others on climate change and human rights because he was more interested in overturning Obama's achievements. He wants to be the person people remember, and if he's not going to be, he's going to overturn anything that might actually get things done. And this has a very important impact. First, this hurts our ability to reach our diplomatic goals on climate change and human rights, and it hurts the chance at future leaders of after Trump appearing legitimate both internationally and domestically. Our second impact on this is without the ability for future presidents to have sway on climate change, we can never get countries like China and India on board with such initiatives which are so important. Furthermore, our climate policy domestically hurts ecosystems. For example, there's no more Clean Water Act. We have strict protections for national and state parks. This has a snowball effect to the bigger issue. Coal implants are being built next to low-income communities, which are minority communities, and it pollutes their communities. This is just another form of structural racism, and that is why we regret the election of Donald Trump. Thank you.
And that was Abby Upshaw serving as tonight's Prime Minister, starting off the case for the side government in a pretty strong and solid case, I would say. So now we will turn it over to the leader of the opposition, Sasha Kaur from St. Andrews Debate Society.
All right, I'm going to give you 3 main points today as to why on the balance, we do not regret the rise of Donald Trump. Firstly, he has exposed these underlying issues, systematic and structural issues within the United States that were not currently addressed adequately. Secondly, we have seen the rise of the strong left in reaction to the exposing of these issues, and we think that is good. Thirdly, we are seeing a new galvanized voter base that is more engaged and larger with politics than ever before. But first, some points of rebuttal. Firstly, the Prime Minister has talked about these moderates, how they are this rational voice, how they are, sort of talking about these things. The issue is these moderates did not necessarily make meaningful change when they were in charge of the United States. Even if we're looking to Obama started issues such as ICE within the United States. This is an issue that we don't think that moderates specifically can stop this issue of polarization. Secondly, we think on the point of fake news, people generally watch the news station that they prefer anyway. People buy the same newspaper over and over again. We think, if anything, this rise of the understanding of fake news existing has led people to start evaluating their news sources and thinking more critically about what they are reading than ever before. Secondly, on the point of the strict economic protections, again, we think these were systematic issues that existed within the United States even before the rise of Donald Trump. Now, rather, because we have people sort of looking very specifically at Trump and what he's doing, these issues are more highlighted. So that brings me on to my first point of why we are exposing these issues. We agree that Trump is bad in the present. However, we think that with the election of Donald Trump, we are building a better future than we would have gotten if we had not elected Donald Trump. Our impacts for the future are better than the impacts that would have come without Donald Trump. So firstly, we are seeing the problems with politics now. We are seeing these systematic issues, such as poor healthcare structures, such as, poor help for poor people, especially sort of within the middle of America. We are seeing sort of very strongly these issues of structural racism and xenophobia. We are seeing these issues of, environmental degradation very, very strongly and starkly because we are so hyper-focused on what Trump is doing. We have it before, racism still exists. Police brutality still existed. However, now we are focused onto it. We are locked onto this issue. You didn't necessarily want to attack people for being racist if they weren't openly racist. Now they're being openly racist, and we can actually probably adequately address this issue. So, we're questioning the status quo. And then there's an impetus to make things better. And this brings me on to my second point, which is the rise of the strong left and what they are specifically doing to address these systematic issues that are bad. Yes?
Okay, so you said that the moderates or the people in the middle didn't bring much change, but don't they still deserve a voice? I've proven to you that Trump has actually stripped them of their voice. So how are you not taking their voice away?
So we actually think that now, currently, with the rise of Trump, the moderates now have to defend their right to have a voice more, and that makes the moderate base stronger. Now, not only can they just assume being moderate is good and just be moderate, they have to defend why they think being moderate is a good thing. They have to defend what they are doing when they are staying moderate, and that makes moderates actually stronger than they were previously. So, why is the rise of the strong left good? With people such as Bernie Sanders, AOC, what we're seeing is people actually addressing these issues through policy change, through Congress. They're starting to say, we need an impetus to make things better. We need to create structural change, but they are also providing very concrete ways to get structural change. Not only that, but no thank you, they are getting people behind them. They are starting to bring other politicians, for example, we're looking at with Bernie and all his delegates that he currently has. We're seeing more of these people, sort of have bigger bases, start to really think about these policy changes that are coming on this strong left in terms of sort of trying to combat what Trump has done. We think these policy changes would not have existed previously because the strong left was demonized. However, now we have such a strong right wing, we need a strong left to combat that, and people are more likely to support this strong left. We think the strong left is good because they are generally promoting policies such as Medicare for All, which is improving the healthcare and lives of Americans. They are, trying to combat student loan debt. They are trying to combat systematic racism. They are trying to combat environmental degradation, and we think all of these things are good. But thirdly, we also think that the rise of Donald Trump has brought more attention and focus into politics as a whole. Why is this? Donald Trump is charismatic. He's interesting. He does weird shit, and people think that it is enjoyable. People want to watch this. This is really important because now people who previously were not engaged in politics, who thought politics was dry or uninteresting, are now engaged with it. This is good because as we've started to see, the youth vote, which has generally been incredibly sort of small and uninspired, are now really galvanized and trying to get into politics and trying to make a change. We're seeing more people more engaged with politics, more engaged with facts, more engaged with what is going on both a national and local level, trying to examine what their political reality is, but also taking agency in terms of voting to change this. We think this is an incredibly good thing because the more people who are involved in politics and democracy means that the United States government can actually represent its people better. So for these three reasons, we think that the rise of Donald Trump is leading to a better tomorrow than we would have gotten if we had not seen the rise of Donald Trump. Thank you.
And that was Sasha Kaur starting off the side opposition bench with a very impactful and powerful speech. We will now turn it over to the Deputy Prime Minister, Manny Reyes, who will be rebuilding the Prime Minister's case.
I would like to extend a quick blanket of thank you. Thank you for everyone being here, and let's have a very good and educational debate. So first, I want to discuss 4 main points of rebuttal before offering a new substantive point of matter that's really going to push the debate over on the government bench. But first, on my first main point of rebuttal, they stated that Donald Trump getting elected really brought the light to many of these problems, and that's a good thing. However, I will actually argue that many of these problems got net worse after President Trump was elected. Go back to the articulation that Abby makes in her first speech with cognitive dissonance. When people are having this idea that they want to be a Republican, but the actions of the Republican Party is so far right, or the Democrats is so far left, they're forced to move their ideologies to meet their actions and meet their ideas. So what does that mean? We see more people moving their anchor point of where they're at, more to right and more to left. So we actually argue with the election of President Trump, this issue got net worse, and we see more people on the right coming out and committing more of these atrocities like Charlottesville, where it was literally an alt-right rally because Donald Trump makes this more prevalent. Secondly, they said that we can make all this change with a strong left. I have a couple responses. One, you can't make change with no one working together. If we have this extremely polarized government, nothing will ever get done, and simply we just get stuck in this world where the United States gets gradually worse without getting anything accomplished. Furthermore, we will have to argue that the strong left is forcing other moderates to actually shift right, because whenever you have this polarization and people aren't willing to listen to the complete opposite side of the spectrum, you move moderates. But when moderates are seeing the strong left as too left, they are moved right, which only makes their point net worse. Yes, your question, I apologize.
Yes, so will moderates ever pass Medicare for all?
We'll have to articulate that whenever we have this polarization, you're alienating the moderates so they don't actually have a voice. Whenever we see more people in the middle, we get more things closer to Medicaid for all, which eventually moves the line more to the left over time. You're not going to convince someone who's completely Republican and right to automatically go with Medicare for all. And finally, we'll have to say that they said that people are more engaged in debate. But young people don't vote if they don't get their way. And we see that this will not make a better future. The only thing President Trump is doing is making it worse for the people now, not only domestically, but overall. So after that point, I want to go on to my third substantive point of matter, and that is how Trump's policy on immigration and on nuclear policy is very problematic. First, I'd like to discuss immigration. We're going to look at this in 2 ways. First, we're going to look at how immigration and Trump's border wall and travel ban to certain countries abroad is very problematic. We see that Trump and the far right has continually painted these individuals who are south of the border or in these countries as the other. This demonizes these individuals and it dehumanizes them to a point where people don't want to help people who might need the help. We see Trump loses and the future U.S. leaders loses their ability.
Point of information.
1 second, please. They lose their ability to have sway in regions. So we see when there's a refugee crisis like the Libyan refugee crisis, we see that these refugees are put into slavery. They're dehumanized and sex trafficked. But the United States has no sway because we won't even open up our borders to people who are wanting a better life. We see that this immigration policy and this sense of dehumanization makes things very net worse, but also on immigration. America was founded on, and they prided themselves on, that we're a melting pot, that we accept other cultures, and that we want other cultures to thrive within the United States to have this certain dream of sorts. However, this recent shift away from this ideology makes everything net worse. But now we're seeing as if you're not a straight white male, then you're probably not the perfect image of an American. This is bad. We want our values to be open and be a melting pot like we have cherished for so many times. This House, as the United States, should care about this because we want people to be open. You want to give people back their humanity and let individuals who want a better life here and abroad get that chance. But with shifting our immigration policy, it makes everything net worse. It makes our initiatives completely impossible. But also, on to the nuclear policy. Trump's nuclear policy and his rhetoric is very problematic. Yes, real quickly.
Did America have that good of an immigration policy and a friendliness towards refugees and displaced persons prior to Donald Trump?
I say that Obama with DACA actually was allowing individuals to at least have a chance in making the problem a lot better. But the Trump administration getting rid of DACA, the Dreamers, getting rid of asylum cities, it makes the problem net worse. But on to nuclear policy. So Trump has been very problematic with nuclear weapons, specifically the Iran nuclear deal. How he did not attempt to reform it whatsoever. He just got rid of it and then he provoked Iran. Furthermore, his rhetoric toward North Korea, he literally called Kim Jong-un little rocket man and challenged him to nuke the United States. While this rhetoric in and of itself is problematic, we see that this type of idea and rhetoric towards nuclear arms is only making the world a much dangerous place. We need to, of course, us as the United States House should care about this because not only is it making worse for right now, but it's making for worse generations to have an unstable environment. We all know that nuclear weapons has deterrence within itself. But whenever President Trump uses this rhetoric and uses this ideology and policy, it makes everything net worse. So what have I told you today? I told you that the opening opposition does bring up some issues that we probably need to accomplish. But you see with the election of Donald Trump and this increasing polarization within voters, especially in terms of cognitive dissonance when they're moving away, there's no way we can reap the benefits if we can never actually get anything done. Furthermore, I told you that his idea of immigration is not only demonizing and dehumanizing people abroad, which we should care about other people in the United States, and we should care about people trying to get a better life, but it's actually tarnishing America's image. And it's hurting their ability to get things done and help sway things like the Libyan slave crisis. And finally, I've told you that his policy on nuclear arms and nuclear weapons are making everything net worse and making the world overall a more dangerous place. So we can see that this increased polarization, the complete loss of democratic legitimacy to get things done, and his problematic immigration and nuclear bills are many reasons why we regret the election of President Trump.
And that was Manny Reyes as the Deputy Prime Minister. We will now turn it over to Anna Ruth Cockerham, who is the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, who will close out the top half of today's debate.
Alright, I'm going to do some points of rebuttal to opening government. I'm going to explain why Sasha's case is significantly more important and impactful than theirs and also more likely to happen. And then I'm going to rebuild Sasha's case if I have some time. Cool. Let's talk about opening government then. I think the first thing that comes out in DPM, right, that's necessarily new is that we talk about their immigration policy of and nuclear policy of Donald Trump being bad, right? Well, I want to say that I can probably name individual policies that are bad for most presidents. I think a particularly useful example might be Afghanistan or the Iraq War, things that created a significant portion of these refugees in the first place, right? I think these are policies of previous governments that are impactful on the same scale. So I'm not necessarily sure about whether this is regretting electing Donald Trump or regretting America existing in the way it does and always has done and doing the bad things that it has done historically. I think this characterization that the United States was super open to immigrants and things all along is probably not true, right? Obama started the ICE raids, right? The border wall started to be built by Bush, right? Police brutality is historic and has happened over a significant period of time. I think these things might have been made slightly worse by his policies. They have probably also been made slightly worse by previous policies in the past. But I think that importantly, what Donald Trump's policies have done, in the large sense that they are, is draw attention to these facts that these issues were always existing. Because I think people just didn't realize how bad it was and how significantly harmful the United States was to immigrants all along. I think now they are, because the way that Donald Trump's policies have been phrased has allowed people to talk about it. And then we get this thing about the moderates becoming more right-wing. I think this is kind of a bit confusing to me. I think we've given some good examples of why, given the things that Donald Trump has done, people are more likely to become left-wing because they recognize the need for left-wing policies that they never previously recognized, right? I think the reason that people were moderate is because they didn't really know that there were significant problems in the United States that needed to be solved. I think now they know those problems exist, they're more likely to become left-wing and support policies that end them. But I also think that, listen, if you're a super centrist, moderate person like they're characterizing, and they call it rational, but I think it's kind of offensive to phrase left-wing people as irrational. I think that, if you're this super centrist person, you probably really didn't like Donald Trump. So I'm kind of unsure what incentives you have to become more right-wing. I think even at the end of the day, I think that shift is outweighed by an increase in support for the left. We also get this thing then that moderates need a voice. Listen, I'm not sure we've necessarily taken their voice. They can still vote. They can still talk about stuff. They can still call their senator or their congressperson or whatever. I think their voice hasn't been taken, but more importantly, a voice has been given to the disadvantaged people that exist in the United States and importantly have existed all along to talk about the difficulties that they are facing. I think that polarization to the left that they are characterizing as bad is enfranchising people to talk about the issues and the difficulties that they have been facing all along that they previously never got to talk about. I just think that, enfranchising those people is significantly more important than ever giving the moderates a voice. I'll take your POI now if you want.
Is Bernie Sanders going to be the next president of the United States?
Probably, and I'm going to talk about that now. Cool. Let's then talk about what I think Sasha's case is, about how this has exposed the issues that exists within the US and thus empowered the strong left and empowered these figures to be more likely to be elected. But I also think, irrespective of whether an individual figure, i.e. Bernie Sanders, gets elected, the kind of policies they support are more likely to be talked about and more likely to happen. And I think that's also particularly important. Let's talk then again about the exposing issues. I think, as I said before, previously the United States was not a good place. It's not like Donald Trump suddenly made it terrible. People were disenfranchised, people were brutalized, things like this happened all the time. It's just that nobody really necessarily talked about it. They weren't seen to be particularly bad issues. I think what Donald Trump has done, unlike other politicians, is because his policies are quite large, they're quite significant attacks, and also he makes very large and ostentatious statements to go with them that catch things like a lot of media attention. His policies are very eye-catching and interesting. I think they're very easy to talk about and they're very easy to oppose, because it's very easy when Donald Trump makes swathing racist statements, for instance, to say that Donald Trump is a racist and his immigration policy is racist and that's why we shouldn't do it. Whereas when Obama implemented significant immigration policies that did have significant negative impacts, you couldn't paint him as a racist and you couldn't say that he was really bad, and so it wasn't seen that those policies were as harmful as they actually were. I think that's necessarily drawn attention to the issue. What has this done then? I think this has empowered activists and left-wing politicians to highlight that these issues exist, where previously they were able to be ignored. I think that means that they get lots more press attention, and I think that means that people think that these issues are much more believable and know that change is needed, which means that they're more likely to consider left-wing politicians as rational and useful to vote for. Yeah.
Whenever Donald Trump uses the rhetoric like Mexicans are all drug dealers and criminals, and then he shuts down the government for a month to get funding for his border wall, how is that not more problematic than we've seen in the past?
So, like, I don't think that this is more problematic at the point in which the government constantly shut down under Obama and things as well. Like, again, I think you need to characterize why this is specifically worse than any other previous politician at the point in which you're arguing for the status quo that existed before. But I also think, like, you know, I'm willing to bite that this is a small harm that happens for what is a general increase in support for the left in the United States, which means that positive change is more likely to happen in the future. And I think that outweighs a small harm that we experience now at the point at which we fix long-standing problems for people. How do I think the left then gets more powerful? Listen, I think when these when these issues are revealed, I think that people are more likely to consider them, and that is empowered figures like, you know, AOC and Bernie Sanders to be more likely to be elected, and they get things like more time on the news and things like that, because it's really great that they oppose Donald Trump and that they talk about these issues that we're now seeing. But I also think, like, you know, more people see left-wing policies like Medicare for All, for instance, or abolishing ICE that previously people thought were really radical as actually something that is sensical at the point at which they realize that these are massive issues that people are facing. Why do I think then that the strong left is more likely to get elected? I think, listen, people really dislike Donald Trump, especially young people. They're now more likely to turn out and vote. But I also think that people know that left-wing politics is needed now. And I also think, like, listen, polarized politics really enthuses people. It's really exciting. It's why people watch the impeachment hearings, for instance. And I think that means that people are more likely to turn out and vote. I think the point at which most people are nice and rational, that's probably for the left.
And that was Anna Ruth Cockerham closing out the top half of the debate. And we will now move to the bottom half of the debate with the leader of the closing government, who is Ruth Batten, debating tonight's resolution, which is, on balance, this House regrets the election of Donald Trump.
Okay, in CG, I think we're going to tell you specifically why the counterfactual happens, why it's better in the long term, and why the election of Trump in 2016 made all the future presidents from 2016 onwards worse, and why that's a really bad thing. Firstly, just a bit of rebuttal. I think OO's mechanism is based on three things, all of which don't work. So the first thing they say is that you expose systemic issues in the system in the US, and that means that it's more likely things are done about it. I think this doesn't work at the point at which they either have to accept that those issues have to get a lot worse in order for people to recognize that they're issues, which means that in the short term, like, thousands and millions of people are really badly harmed by poor immigration policies. People literally die and their lives are made so much worse. I think if they're willing to bite that harm, that's a very risky strategy to take, and I think it's not a harm that we're willing to bite. Or they have to say, oh, well, they just focus really hard on what Donald Trump is doing, so the issue doesn't get worse, but people care more because it's Donald Trump, and that's why you get that exposure. I don't necessarily think that this is unique to Donald Trump. Loads of people very far on the left of the Democratic Party literally hated Hillary Clinton and thought that she was a lizard person who was secretly a Republican and she was doing all of these bad things. I have absolutely no idea why you wouldn't still have loads of really left-wing pundits on, like, CNN talking about these issues. They don't prove that, so therefore they can't really take it. You also can't really do anything about those issues to the point of which you have worse presidents, which is what we're going to talk about. Then they say that the strong left rises. This is kind of what my POI was about, because clearly this isn't true, because Biden is rising and Bernie Sanders isn't to as much of an extent, right? I think there's lots of reasons why we probably get more moderate, why they actually have more moderate people on the left, and so that case doesn't work. And then this thing about engagement I also think doesn't work, because yes, you probably have more engagement on, like, woke Twitter, but you also have engagement from, like, white nationalists on Breitbart, right? I think at best this is kind of like a weird racism wash, right? Where, like, you get engagement from both sides and both of those things are bad and therefore they probably, like, cancel each other out. I think at the point at which you embolden white nationalists to do basically whatever they want within a country, I think that's probably also bad and probably tangibly affects people's lives far more than just a few more young people who go on Twitter voting. Okay, so if Donald Trump loses in 2016, what is the counterfactual? I think it's probably that you're going to have 4 to 8 years, probably 4 years, of Hillary Clinton, and then you're more likely to get a moderate Republican candidate in 2020. Why is this the case? Because after losing elections, primary voters fear losing again, so they don't want to put up similar candidates. This is a reason why Elizabeth Warren has lost in the primary, because this narrative of, like, a woman who is, like, kind of similar to Hillary Clinton can't win. They're likely to vote for a candidate who cares more about the Constitution, is personally clean, cleaner, doesn't have those kinds of issues that Donald Trump has, right? You're more likely to have moderates, right? Donald Trump is kind of a unique case in this point because he's not an ideological conservative. He is very, very popular for a thing that isn't politics and has a huge personality cult around him, right? He's a very specific character that is probably unlikely to happen again also, right? Why has Donald Trump broken loads of democratic norms? And why is that a really bad thing? And why uniquely is that going to make the political situation in the US worse for years to come? Firstly, because he's actively invited foreign interference into the US system. So he's actively invited the interference of Russia in elections. He's actively invited Ukraine to try and dig dirt on Biden. And he's obstructed the investigations into those actions. So he's not only done things, but he's also obstructed any sort of investigation or any sort of consequences for those actions. Secondly, he's politicized the judiciary and the executive, so he has invited such nominees as Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, and he's also fired people like Comey from the executive, maybe? Is that what the executive is? The executive, okay. Thirdly, he's profited from the presidency, right? So he's funneled state visits to Mar-a-Lago. He has invited foreign dignitaries to stay in his own resorts that his company profits from. He has not put his investments in a blind fund, so he still has a pretty substantial conflict of interest. And he's also just given jobs to people who clearly aren't qualified, i.e. his daughter's husband, right? I think that means that he has had a huge amount of benefit from being the president, and he's used that position in order to benefit himself to a great extent. He's also he's very likely to get away with it. Why? Because he's filled the judiciary with Republicans who love him, so they're very unlikely to bring any sort of recompense against him. But also there is this huge thing of liberals are attacking Donald Trump because he's seen as an outsider that the Democratic establishment and Nancy Pelosi hate, and therefore any sort of accountability that the Democrats attempt is always going to be rebuffed by the Republicans and by supporters of Donald Trump and by Donald Trump himself. So he's very likely to just continue getting away with it. We see this in terms of the impeachment trial, that yes, he technically got impeached, right? But didn't really get impeached because there is a huge base of people still within the American system who are not willing to have any sort of accountability, right? So this was going to keep happening, right? Why is this? Well, because he set a legal precedent that these kinds of things are things that a president is allowed to do legally and get away with. He is allowed to invite foreign interference into elections and into the political system, and he doesn't have to be impeached in any way, right? He's politicized impeachments, which means that you're very unlikely to get any sort of real accountability for presidents. You're more likely to have all the kind of liberal perceptions of attacks I've already said, but he's also just legitimized this kind of conduct, right? That people in America view the president as this amazing, high up, prestigious thing, right? Someone who is the president is someone who's meant to be incredibly, someone who is of amazing moral character, someone who is incredibly powerful, and someone who is not necessarily within the same realm as rest of public life, right? When that kind of person gets away, when the president gets away with that kind of conduct, it means that kind of conduct is legitimized. I've already kind of referenced this in terms of white nationalism, but you also have that in terms of just the corrupt conduct that he has done. What's the impact of this? Firstly, I just think that American democracy is a good thing that should be kept in principle, right? I think people should have the right to hold their government to account. Otherwise, you're more likely to have things like authoritarianism and human rights abuses, especially when people are more worried about their economic situation than their political rights. Secondly, you just have a massive ability for a future president to be able to profiteer from their position. They're more likely to allow wealthy actors to lobby them into doing what they want. They're allowed to get the NRA to not do anything about school shootings, or Amazon to Jeff Bezos can do what he wants, right? You also kind of have wider corruption that funnels money away from average American systems and towards people who are the most wealthy in the country. You're also more likely to have presidents get away with bad things, right? I think we also kind of regret the election of Bill Clinton for this reason, right? I think when you have presidents doing bad things to women or being actively racist, I think, and they can get away with that because of the culture of non-accountability that they've put up, I think that's incredibly bad precedent to set for not only the political system in America, but the rest of the country, and that is why we regret the election of Donald Trump.
And that was Ruth Batten showing us an excellent example of a phenomenal rebuttal speech. So we are now going to turn it over to the leader of Second Op, who is Trenton Hawes from the University of Central Missouri.
I have a very hard position to be in. But I think it's been a really educational debate, and I've got a lot to get through. So I'm gonna first start in some summary of top half of the debate, some rebuttal of the previous speaker, and then move into 2 new substantive points as to why we don't regret the election of Donald Trump. First, a summary of top half debate. I think top half debate gets really muddled down in left versus right politics and things that are not unique to Donald Trump. We get bogged down in this new alt-right ideology that was rising before Trump was in office. It was happening at the tail end of the Obama administration, and this isn't unique to Trump. What we need to look towards, and why I think bottom half does a better job of this, is that we need to look at things that are unique to Donald Trump. Things like his rhetoric and his practices. Policies are multifaceted. There are too many things that go into policy formation and allowance in order for us to be like, Trump, you're the only reason why this happened. I'll take your first of 2.
When will you engage with our point that polarization creates more cognitive dissonance within voters because of Trump, and this is bad?
Yeah, so we'll get to that in our first substantive point, which is about the rhetoric that he uses and how that actually leads to better overall movements and exposing of racists. But we'll get to that in a moment. Going into some brief rebuttal, the first speaker for closing government gives you some reasons on why Trump has been a pretty bad president. We're yeah, he's done some really bad things. But they outline things like lobbying, which will exist and have existed well before Trump. The NRA has only grown every year since 1978 and will continue to grow. And there's no reason why this is unique to Trump or why we should uniquely regret Trump. They also say that it legitimizes profiteering and the dissolution of the legitimacy of the government. We see that this was already happening by both sides. Donald Trump wasn't unique to this. Democrats, when Donald Trump was elected, before any of this came out, before any of the Mueller report came out, were we are impeaching you. This wasn't just a right or left wing issue, or a singular right or left wing issue. It was both sides playing the game. This shows us that there's no real way to regret something that isn't unique to Donald Trump. But now going on to our case, we'll show you 2 unique reasons why this isn't the case. First is going to be that of movements, empowerment of citizens. We see currently that the Me Too movement and other groups such as that have actually been emboldened specifically because of Trump's rhetoric, both on the campaign trail and while in office. Once the video from TMZ leaked out that Trump was quoted saying, "I grab women by their," we saw that groups started to actually rise in resistance to him. We saw that these kinds of policies, these grassroots movements, were actually more empowering and actually able to prompt real social change. Top half kind of alludes to this, but makes it more of a political left and right question, which will not happen under Donald Trump and will not happen under forms of gridlock. We see the only thing that we can look towards is his rhetoric and how he talks about things. Additionally, we've seen forms of violence advocated for by Donald Trump. When he was at one of his rallies and said, "I can go out into the street and shoot someone and my ratings won't drop." Now, while I give him credit for that bold statement, it's a very problematic statement for a lot of reasons we don't need to outline. But it just shows us the issues that have come specifically from his rhetoric. As Opening Gov alludes to, actual alt-right rallies are happening. Actual people are getting hurt by his rhetoric specifically. But we are using this to be able to actually create a better society and hold the government more accountable, as closing government wants us to do. And we'll get to that in our second main point, which is that of unmasking the racists. What is happening now is that Trump's rhetoric uniquely has allowed racists to come out and show their face. Now, while that is prima facie bad, the way that it's actually more beneficial that Trump was elected is now we're actually able to deal with them. We're able to isolate them. People are now able to look out and see that these racists are actually here and they're among us. We now know where our next door neighbor stands, and we can actually identify these kinds of issues. It allows for better voting practices on both the left and the right. It allows us to pull ourselves away from alt-right ideologies and ostracize and remove those alt-right ideologies from society. This was not happening before. People were able to hide under these masks of racism, hide underneath their shells because they couldn't come out and fight for themselves. What ended up happening, though, is that Trump was able to embolden this, and now we're able to finally go to the root of the problem. Instead of operating in the shadows, he's shown a light, and now we can deal with it. Your second question, too.
How do you propose removing these kinds of alt-right and white nationalist things from society?
Yeah, I'm not going to, it's not my burden to, give you a plan on how we deal with alt-right people. If I had my personal choice, I'd probably, we'll get into that later. I don't think this isn't the time or place to discuss, how we remove alt-right people, but what it's allowed is for the discussion to happen. The fact that we can ask these kinds of questions now and engage in this kind of discourse is more beneficial. The fact that we're now all sitting at this table and actually able to have a discussion on, these problems are real. This wasn't happening under the Obama administration. It wasn't happening under the Bush administration. It wasn't happening under the Clinton administration. We are uniquely getting these dialogues under the Trump administration. So, what have I told you today? A couple things. The top half of the debate gets too muddled down in right politics versus left politics in voting, which isn't unique to Donald Trump. Closing government, tells you that Trump is a pretty bad guy. Yeah, he's a pretty bad guy. We tell you why. We tell you why, though, for two main reasons. First, the emboldenment of social movements and how his rhetoric uniquely has allowed for these things to be increased and actually have more participation and more actual policies being passed to help prevent these harms outlined. And secondly, that we're finally able to unmask these racists that have been hiding in the dark, that we're able to finally outline and get rid of them. For those reasons, I'm proud to oppose.
And that was Trenton Hawes as the leader of Closing Opposition. We will now turn it to Malcolm Risk, who will end the side government debate, serving as the government whip.
All right, I'd like to start out by thanking everyone for coming to St. Andrews. It's a small town, and it gets lonely, so we love to have some people. I'm lonely too. All right. Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World, says that when bombs are exploding around people, they stop caring about civil rights. Economic dislocation, social alienation, and a turbulent international climate have made the United States a nation ripe for the rise of authoritarianism. Donald Trump's election have planted the seed for the rise of this specter. Donald Trump's presidency has trampled on the American Constitution, American democratic values, and the institutions that preserve these things. If you care about protecting them, you should regret his election deeply. I'm going to go into a whole bunch of responses to both OO and CO, and then talk a little bit about why I think what Ruth brings you in this debate about the preservation of American democratic norms and institutions is the most important thing. First of all, responding to OO, and I think the majority of OO's case can be summed up as asking, are Donald Trump's policies worse than the policies that would have been implemented otherwise, and in the long term, do we get better policies implemented? The first thing that they say is that Trump's policies were systematic and probably would have happened anyway. I'd first of all like to point out that we're probably willing to concede this, given that unlike our opening half, less of our case is premised off of Trump's policies, but more on his personal conduct and the lack of ability to hold him accountable. But second of all, I think it's probably a slight exaggeration to describe Barack Obama, who expanded healthcare coverage to millions of Americans, as no different from Trump, who took away healthcare coverage from millions of Americans. I'm sure that you can point out lots of bad things that other presidents did, but the point is, there are loads of cases where we can point out that Trump was worse. We can't just both sides this. Then they say that it's likely that a strong left is going to rise in response to Trump, and that's good. First of all, this Tuesday, Joe Biden took a big lead in the Democratic primary because Democratic voters are now afraid to take risks because they don't want to lose to Donald Trump in the next election, so I don't think this happens. But even if Bernie Sanders was to win a presidential election or a similar left-wing candidate did, it's likely that they would run into a large amount of resistance from the judiciary and the Senate such that Medicare for All probably isn't going to pass anyway, so we can't hang our hat off of these ideas. Then there's this whole idea about discourse and about how just knowing about terrible things happening is a really good thing. My first response to this, if I took a sledgehammer to the Golden Gate Bridge, that would probably push up the issue of infrastructure in American discourse. I also probably shouldn't do that because millions upon millions of people's jobs rely on it. Similarly, it's probably not worth separating millions of children from their families just in order to elevate immigration as part of the discourse. I think that's wrong in principle, and I think it's wrong in practice. Second of all, Yeah, that was basically it. It is wrong to hurt people in the short term for these long-term goals. Then, what does CO say in terms of rebuttal to our case? In terms of the long-term effect.
Sites every single day. We are learning about the history and the culture as much as we can. And so our students are getting a really phenomenal experience out of this trip. And it really does advance those pillars of the learning to a greater degree model. Talk about, taking education outside of the classroom. Talk about gaining that worldly perspective. It's been so fun to watch our students just learn about the culture and all of, just experience like the different foods. We've had our students try haggis. FYI, they didn't love it. None have been brave enough to try the black pudding yet. But here, one of our students today told me that she had never even had an omelet before this trip. So, talk about broadening our I know. But talk about broadening their experiences here. It's just a really, really fun opportunity for them to just learn about how much larger the world is than just our tiny little Missouri bubble. So Jack has been doing this trip for several years now. Can you just tell us a little bit about why you had the idea to create this trip? What was the purpose? What was your vision here?
I was fortunate that when I was in college, I was able to come and debate and made some really good friends. And then 23 years ago, I was asked to come and talk about U.S. debate because they were increasingly running into teams from the U.S. at the World's Championships. Could not figure us out because we do debate much differently than the rest of the world does. And so they just wanted some insight into American debate, American debaters, why we do things so much differently. And we got to talking about that more and more, and I wanted my students to experience the same kind of things that I did, to learn about the culture, to learn about a form of debate that's a little bit more engaging. I think sometimes the skills probably transfer maybe a little easier into the boardroom or into the courtroom, those kinds of things. And so, I just started bringing kids over, and it started at unions where I had experience, Glasgow, St. Andrews, Edinburgh, and then we just began to expand it, and it's large enough now that we have to vary the tour from year to year. Last year we were in Ireland and Wales and then ended up in London. This year we're doing the Scotland kind of swing where we take in most of Scotland and then head south to Durham and then head south into London. We've done Belfast before. We've, we're excited that Aberdeen is up and running again. There for a few years, Dundee was having some difficulty keeping their society going, but they're up and they're running and they seem quite strong. Stirling, we heard, was up and running again. And you have to understand that in the UK, they don't have coaches. They don't have faculty members. It's all a student-run, kind of like student government in the U.S. It's a society, and it's all student-run, and sometimes you've got students that are extremely well organized and have a really strong vision of things, and things go well. And then those students graduate, and maybe the students that come in behind them are not quite as organized, or they're distracted by other things and other interests, and so things kind of wane for a little while. Most of the bigger unions are strong and stay strong. Glasgow, Edinburgh, St. Andrews have always been, they always will be. but other universities, my father-in-law graduated from Harriet Watt, which is an engineering school in Edinburgh, and we used to debate them, and their society has gradually died out. Would love to see them up
Absolutely.
and running again. Some really fond memories with their society.
Yeah.
But it's just getting them here, getting them to understand that we are a very small bubble in Missouri. That there's a big broad world out there, and if they're going to be able to claim their place in that big broad world, they're going to have to eventually get their feet wet. And I think this is a really good way for them to ease into that transition into globalization, into getting a more worldly perspective and understanding that people around the world have a view of us and a perspective about the U.S., and that we need to do everything we can to make sure that we present ourselves in a way that we would like them to remember us.
Right.
Right.
And you bring up such a good point, because when we think about speech and debate, we often think about the delivery component. So our students are learning how to write and deliver speeches. They're learning how to speak on their feet. They're learning how to research points and create speeches and debate cases. And that's all well and good. And it's absolutely true. Our students are learning phenomenal writing, research, and oral skills. But what we often don't think about as much, and we don't make enough, and we just don't draw attention to this side of it as much, is they really learn a lot about diversity, understanding, empathy, and compassion. And that is what I love about this trip in particular. I mean, we could debate British parliamentary style or world style in the United States. There are pockets where it is quite popular, although it's pretty far away from Missouri. There would be an opportunity for us to do that. But bringing them here, just...
It's a whole different level.
It totally is. It totally is.
We go to Vanderbilt to a Worlds tournament there. There's Worlds in Chicago, Loyola, the United States Air Force Academy. But all of those are, other Americans. And so what you don't want to do is create an echo chamber where we only hear U.S. perspectives. We only hear how Americans view international issues, how Americans view themselves. When we bring them here, they break out of that echo chamber and they begin to hear other perspectives. And I think it really does help them to understand, wow, I never really thought about it from that perspective.
Right.
Which begins that process of self-discovery that is the bridge from being an adolescent into really, I think, a self-aware adult.
Absolutely.
To understand that you have to be able to put yourself into the shoes of the other person. You have to think from their perspective. You have to honor and respect. You may not agree, and that's okay. Maybe that's not a choice that you would make for your life or for your politics or for your family, but you have to respect and you have to understand that it's a choice that others make. And you have to be able to meet them where they are and argue policies and have discussions calmly, rationally, with compassion and understanding. That's how you build peace. That's how you build allies. That's how you develop consensus. Standing across the room, shouting at one another, refusing to listen to one another, all it does is lead to more of what we have, I think, now in Congress. And Fox News and
Yeah.
MSNBC, as we talked about,
Right.
you know, today.
In the debate, we had a
Right.
great example of the polarization component today.
I mean, you know, I love, you know, and he may be watching, but, you know, Scott Jensen,
Mhm.
you know, love Scott Jensen. He's a professor at Webster University, was a director of forensics there for a number of years, got his master's degree at the University of Central Missouri. He is quite liberal in his politics, and I tend to be probably a little bit more conservative. You know, but the thing I love about Scott and his wife Gina and Tom Surface, one of their faculty members, is we have more in common, you know, because we can talk about things like, for example, healthcare. I'm not a big proponent of, you know, like Medicare for all or single payer kind of government insurance, those kinds of things. But that doesn't mean I don't care about people. And it doesn't mean that I don't want the people who really need health care and can't afford it not to have access. So we agree on the underlying issues. We have compassion for people. The real difference is in the details.
Right.
How would we pay for it? How would we
Sure.
go about doing it? If Congress could just have a discussion of like, look, we all agree that the economy's in trouble and we need to do some things to cut the debt, to balance the budget. It's just the details on how we would do it. I think we could get enough push in the right direction that we could actually solve some issues. But when nobody is listening, nothing is changing.
Right.
You know, so I'm hoping that we are training, and I've seen kids that I've been doing this coaching
For a few years, just a couple.
Yeah, when I started coaching, you were 2. Anyway, yeah.
Which, I mean, isn't very long because...
Oh, God, just last year.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
very articulate for a 3-year-old.
That's right.
Good job, Pam and Joe. Yeah. But I
Shout
mean,
out to my mom and dad.
I've got kids that are lobbyists. I've got kids that are attorneys. I've got former students who are professors and coaches. And when you see those kids come into their own, and they're all extremely bright, extremely intelligent, very articulate, they're leaders in their professions and fields, I know that when I finally shuffle off this mortal coil,
I don't know that will ever happen.
it'll happen sooner or later. You know, it's in good hands. I mean, you know, I'm when I retire, it'll be okay. You know, there's a lot of really bright kids out there that I think are going to do just fine. You know, all the gloom and doom about, you know, everything's falling apart and going to pot.
Those darn millennials.
Those darn millennials.
There's a lot of amazing qualities to those millennials that we're getting to see in these debates and these live streams.
It's not all about avocado toast.
Although avocado toast is amazing, and I have had it for breakfast the last 2 mornings.
Yeah, well, I'm bacon and eggs, white toast, coffee, avocado toast.
I feel like our breakfast choices are so indicative of our personalities.
Yeah.
It's like the best representation of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the old, reliable breakfast food, and you're like, oh, look, something different. Yeah.
You know, I guess that's what makes us work.
Oh, okay.
If we want to say that this works.
You certainly make me work, but that's okay.
Oh, I don't know about that. Now someone's getting a little sassy and a little squirrely.
What?
I see.
No, I don't think so.
Well, typically I don't bring Jack on to the wrap-up show just because we really want to showcase our students in that show.
Yeah, it's just,
And like I said, you probably get a little bored listening to us ramble.
Me, yeah.
Well, I mean, I didn't say it. He did.
Yeah.
But I would like to ask you a couple questions. You know, in the
Has the BBC called about you?
Unfortunately, no. But I'm still waiting.
Crickets.
I'm
Nothing.
still
Yeah.
waiting. There's
Nothing.
still time.
Nothing.
But I would like to ask you a couple questions in the spirit of the wrap-up show.
Oh.
So we can get your
okay.
perspective
All
a little bit.
Yes.
Okay.
The BBC's not going to call.
I
It's just
mean,
not happening.
right, I know, but you know, BuzzFeed, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, I'd like to ask you a few questions if you're okay with that.
Sure.
Okay. So what has been your highlight of the trip this year so far?
Okay, it's a weird highlight. Okay, we flew into Newark, New Jersey. Our airplane was having maintenance issues, which was a fuel leak. So rather than fly and have the plane blow up in midair, it's probably best that they, but we had to spend the night in Newark, New Jersey's airport.
Lovely accommodations.
It was great. The floor was quite soft. We finally got on a plane the next morning. We flew to the UK. We landed at Heathrow, but we had missed our connecting flight. And so we got to spend the night in Heathrow's.
We were reliving
airport.
The terminal, that movie.
Yeah.
We were living
Yeah.
it. Living it.
Yeah. But what was really fun, my highlight for me is that, it's so easy for kids to get grumpy and irritable and complain and those kinds of things. Not a word. They were laughing and having a good time, playing games, singing. It was great to see the kids work together and bond through that hell.
It was a rough
Oh my
couple
gosh.
days.
Yeah.
It was a rough couple days for sure.
It was, yeah. But that was a lot of fun.
It was.
Yeah.
Now, what are you looking forward to the most in this last leg of the trip?
Looking forward to the most in the last leg of the trip. Let's see. Well, I've kind of seen most everything in Durham and London.
Yeah, but we're changing it up on our way down tomorrow.
True. That's true. I have read for many years the history of Northumbria, which is sort of that border between Scotland and the north of England. And Bamberg Fortress, Bamberg Castle, has been there literally since the 600s. And St. Cuthbert comes across, who's a patron saint of that Northumbria. And I've always read about it. I've read about the Vikings and the Danes and the English and the Saxons and the Normans and all of the changing of hands of the fortress and having it torn down and rebuilt and all those kinds of things. And so after 23 years, I'm actually going to get to walk and see the fortress. And then Durham down to London, we're going to stop at Lincoln Castle. It's an 11th century fortress that was built by William the Conqueror, and it's tied very closely to the Magna Carta.
Ooh, that's
and again,
awesome.
That's something I've never seen as somewhat of a history nerd.
Mm-hmm.
I really love seeing new historical kinds of things. So that's going to be,
good.
I think, fun.
Oh, I think so too.
Yeah.
I think so too. Well, I'm going to give you a break.
Oh, thank
from
God.
from talking to me. And
I thought you were resigning. No.
Oh. Anybody hiring out there? BBC, now I really am on the market.
Yeah.
And honestly, if you have a spot for a reporter in St. Andrews, I'm your girl. I could totally live here. Anyway, we're going to give Jack a little bit of a break and bring on one of our very own students, Manny Reyes. So Manny has come on this trip twice now. He was with us last year, and he is on again this year. Oh, you're going to see him squeeze behind me. He's one of our staple debaters on the UCM team and just an all-around pretty phenomenal person. So, Manny, how are you?
I'm good. I'm feeling good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How do you feel the debate went tonight? Feeling good about it?
I do feel good about the debate. I felt like we all offered some very valid points on a very serious issue.
Mm-hmm.
I overall liked the way it went. I'm glad it wasn't completely dull, and
Oh, yeah.
I feel like we got a lot of good points across and talked about issues that like really matter to people.
Yeah. This was Jack and I were talking. This was a really phenomenal debate. You know, we talked about the policy component of Trump's presidency, but then we also talked about sort of the character and decorum
Yes.
components coming out of it as well. So I feel like we got a very well-rounded debate over what could have been a pretty tense topic, and it didn't get tense at all.
Yeah, I think the debaters at St. Andrews, I think they did a great job in engaging in the debate, but also being very respectful about everything. And I feel like we would like to keep it respectful in most ways. And
Sure.
I think it is a sensitive topic, but the debaters at St. Andrews treated us very well, and they were always super kind to us.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, Manny, you've been debating for how many years now? Because you're a high school debater.
Yes, I did 3 years in high school, and this is my 3rd year in college.
Okay, all right. So what sort of skills do you feel like debate has helped you with?
I think the obvious one is public speaking. Like, when I first joined debate, I was pretty shy, and I didn't really know how to speak my thoughts well to other people. But I feel like debate has really taught me to not only speak well to others, like in a public setting, but like my peers also. I feel like I've gotten a lot closer in my relationships in debate and otherwise because of the skills I've learned from debate over time.
Wow. Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. And what are you hoping to do with these skills in the long run? Are you starting to think past UCM?
Yeah, I've been on the bridge about a couple things. I've looked at law school for a while. I'm now looking a little more towards grad school. So I think that getting my master's in something like communication, it can really allow me to have a multitude of paths to take post schooling.
Yeah.
But also teach me some more valuable skills I think that I can use in life.
That's an awesome approach. Yeah. So Manny, tell me, what has been your favorite part of the trip so far?
I think
probably this interview.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
I think the scenery and being with all these great people, I feel like I've been able to really enjoy like the architects of Scotland so far. It's been beautiful, and it's something that's very different, and it's a great educational experience. But I think the people around me have been really kind, and everyone's been so forthcoming despite airport issues.
Oofta. Yeah, yeah.
But they've also been very open to trying pretty much everything here and really dive into the culture in that like really positive manner. So I think that's been really nice and really awesome to experience with everybody.
Okay. Really serious and important question now.
Okay.
Are you ready for this?
Yes.
Okay. So we have seen Stirling Castle, Edinburgh Castle, and the ruins of St. Andrews. What would you say? Which would you say is your favorite castle so far, and why? Debate me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to debate him. He would totally win.
I don't know if I can pick. Each of them have a different quality to them. I think I like learning about the history behind them and just how they're structured, and like they're so much older than like anything we have in the United States, like before the United States was created. So I think each of the castles have been a new and exciting experience I can really look back on for the rest of my life as something that I can really take away from the trip. So I don't think I can pick a favorite.
What a diplomatic answer. See, like I said, future leader, lovely here. Like, what a diplomatic answer. Okay, all right. So another very important and pressing question. I know. What's the most unique food that you have tried on this year's trip so far?
I did try haggis at a restaurant.
How do you feel?
I like it. It's definitely different than what I've experienced before. I like to try new things and new food, and I think diving into the food is probably an important part of the culture. So once I tried that, I felt closer and more like I learned a lot more from Scotland and their customs. So I really enjoyed it. It was good.
Okay, very nice. I'm impressed. I'm impressed. Okay.
It was a little scary, but
Well, I know. I felt the same way the first time I tried it, to be honest. Oh, oof. I don't think I can ask that. I was just given a question from our DMP students, but I feel like it might start a fight. However, Manny, with his diplomatic answers, I'm sure is going to answer this in the most eloquent and articulate way. Who's your favorite DMPer?
ooh. I think I have to say Shannon.
Oh!
I'm just joking. They're all great. It's been a great time going with everybody. It's been really fun.
It has been really awesome to see this group bond together. Like Jack alluded to, I think our horrible rendition of the terminal in not only the Newark airport, but also Heathrow airport really brought our students together, both the debaters and the DMP folks. And it doesn't feel like two groups of students. It feels like we just have one large contingent. So it's been really fun to watch that as well. Manny, what are you looking forward to as we turn and start to head into England?
I'm really looking forward to London. We've got to go there last year, but I'm looking forward to trying the things I didn't get to last year. It's a huge place and tons of different activities and different things you can learn. I'm excited we're gonna go see some shows that are pretty unique to London, and I think seeing those shows and just walking around more and experiencing more of it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Okay.
I really look forward to it.
And oh no. Well, we already know the answer to that one. Jack wants me to ask Manny who his favorite coach is, but I don't even think he needs to answer. Is there any question, Manny? That's right. Nope. No.
Yes. I'm not gonna say who, but there is no question. There we go.
It's me.
I didn't say a name.
No, we're just getting a little sassy and having some fun here. But like I said, Manny has gone on this trip before. He went on it last year. So I'd like to know, comparing last year's trip to this year's trip, what are some of the biggest differences that you've experienced thus far?
I know I alluded it to earlier, but I think one of it is the people. We're a bigger group than last year, so it was a different experience seeing everyone's different personalities and how everyone meshed. But I think everyone's doing a really good job, like not only the debaters, but with the DMP people. We've had a lot of fun. But I also think one of the main things that's been different is just the cultures that we see and difference between Ireland and Scotland. And I think they're both beautiful, and like we've seen castles in both, but it's little things and customs that you can catch on that is just really unique that you can learn about the different cultures.
Sure. What pieces of advice would you give to students who might be coming on this trip in the future, or may even just be considering studying abroad? What would you tell them?
I think the biggest thing I would tell them is to be open to trying new things, is that you have to be careful because some things you might be able to find home or other places, but it's important to go out and see the local history, go experience different foods, and make sure you just take in your surroundings with the people you're there. It is a really unique experience, and it is a once-in-a-lifetime experience that many people don't get the privilege of doing. And I really am appreciative of my opportunities to actually be able to experience this culture firsthand, and I think the Montgomery Cup isn't a great experience for people.
Correct me if I'm wrong. When you came last year, was that your first time on an airplane even?
Yes, last year it was my first time on an airplane, so Jack talked me through customs and how to not get, like, what to bring and not to bring. And I was a little nervous about flying. I've never flown before. So I got to fly for the first time and be on a boat for the first time. So I think it was...
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I think the experience was like literally nothing like I've ever experienced my entire life. And it was just an amazing experience. I think I'm a better, not only debater, but like a better person. Like I have so much more knowledge because of it.
Sure. And that's another reason that we love this trip. I mean, UCM is a very regional kind of, middle class institution, and a lot of our students just don't have the means to be able to go on study abroad trips. It's expensive, let's face it.
Yes.
And so that's another really important reason that Jack has poured his heart and soul into this trip and keeping it going for so long, is to make sure that students have this opportunity to study abroad, to take an airplane ride and get to see another culture. So that's just another reason that this trip means so much to us, is we give our students this opportunity to just experience something that they may not be able to experience on their own. So a really good and fun trip, and I'm glad that Manny has been able to go now 2 times.
Yes.
Hopefully more times in the future. We'll see.
I'm forever thankful. I really am.
Oh, he's such a good egg, that Manny. Such a good egg. I have a couple questions about tonight's debate in particular. Now we'll just kind of circle back around. Hopefully adjudication will be finishing up soon. I can't imagine it will take too much longer. But if you're still watching, kudos to you. So Manny, 2 minutes. I've been. Two. It's hi mom. Anyway, so given tonight's debate, what do you think was the most powerful argument advanced? And it can be from either side.
I thought there was a couple of arguments from both sides. I really liked the articulation that Abby and I came up with, and that she explained really well about the cognitive dissonance and how whenever individuals are forced to feel like they're siding one way, but their actions don't do another, they have to try to adjust that. And I think that Abby explained it really well, and I think it held through most of the debate, and I think that's something that we'll be looking for in adjudication. And on the op side, I really like the argumentation about how it's bringing light to many of these problems that we face, and how the rhetoric can be harmful, but it might do more good in the long run than harm. There is some refutation of that, but yes.
Oh, okay. It sounds to me like we have the final call. Manny, I think you're right. I think there were some phenomenal arguments all the way down the table. And I really appreciate you coming on and, on the fly and letting me interview you a little bit. Yes. But it sounds like we've got the final call. And first was given to closing government. And so that was the team from St. Andrews. The 2 in the round was given to opening government. Well done, Manny and Abby from UCM. The 3 was given to closing opposition, which was the other UCM team of Bobby and Trenton. And then the 4 was given to opening opposition, which was the other team from St. Andrews. So we want to thank you all for tuning in and sticking with us for this long commentary. Like I said, we will have another show on later tonight. It will be our Scotland wrap-up show. Lots of fun. I've got some surprises up my sleeve I'm super excited about. So make sure you tune back in, and we will talk to you in just a little bit. Have a great rest of your day.